My name is Denise McKenzie. I'm your host for today's International Women's Day celebration. So a big, happy International Women's Day to everybody that's calling in. For those of you that don't know me, I hail originally from Australia and have spent the last 10 years now in the United Kingdom. I'm currently the managing partner for the Place Trust here in the UK, which is a new not-for-profit organisation that's committed to collection of geospatial data for the public good. I'm the former chair of the Association for Geographic Information here in the UK, one of our sponsors and supporters of today, and I'm a part of the steering committee for the Women in Geospatial Network and sit on a number of other geospatial related advisory boards. But I guess mostly I'm a really proud evangelist for all the things that we do in our geospatial profession and how amazing that profession actually is what it contributes to the rest of the world. Personally, though, I think one of the best things is the diverse range of women that we have that are making incredible achievements across the globe. And we're going to hear from two of those women today. But I know that there are many, many, many more. And I guess my message today is to say, keep on doing that great work and keep on being as visible as you can be for others to see the work that you're doing as well. So today's International Women's Day theme is Embrace Equity. And I know also from UN Women that we've seen the goal of digital innovation and technology for gender equality. And I thought that one's actually quite exciting for us as technologists, because I think geography plays such an incredibly important role in what we do and how we work on that issue of gender equality across the planet. So I think that the particular profession we work in has a large amount to contribute to this particular topic. We've got two great speakers sharing their thoughts on their careers, and we'll get into those in just a second. And following their presentations, we'll move into a bit of a panel conversation being facilitated by Mariam Critchin from our Women in Geospatial Network as well. As we go along, please do add your questions to the chat and feel free to shout out on social media. You can find hashtags and handles and so forth on our Women in Geospatial channels. If you're not already signed up for network communications, please go across to womeningeospatial.org and make sure you get signed up to the newsletters. And for, I guess, lovely ladies, people like myself in our profession who really love to offer presentations at conferences, please do consider entering your details into the speakers database so that you can be found by conference organisers and invited to join different activities around the world. It's really important, I guess, from a visibility perspective that more of us are able to be seen in those panels, in those presentations and conferences. Lastly, from me, events like this, even though we're on webinar now, we were looking at doing an in-person event too. They really don't happen just by Women in Geospatial Network. They also happen from partners. So just a quick shout out of the support from Geospatial in London, the AGI, my own organisation Place, and the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap for the support of putting today's event together. Also, a thank you to our facilitator, Mariam, and our panelists and speakers and so forth that are all joining us this morning too. I wish you all inspiring and hopefully thought-provoking experience today. And first up, I'd like to introduce one of our great leaders from the Women in Geospatial community and our new Inspire lead for the Women in Geospatial Network, Mariam Critchin, to give us a short update on the network. So Mariam, if I can get you to take the stage, and I will unmute yourself, hopefully.
Hello. Yep. I don't know if you can see me now.
No, interestingly, you've now got an interesting, oh no, there you are. Lovely to see you, Mariam. Good morning.
Can you see me? I can
see you now. Excellent. So I will forward the slides on and let you get going.
Great. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you celebrate yourself and all the women in your life today. My name is Mariam Critchin. And, well, I'm older than I look. I was blessed with tropical genes. And when I went into leadership, it was my late 20s, 15 years ago in the United Kingdom. And I was a CEO, and my job was to promote my company, to network, to build partnerships and build relationships. It was very hard for me because I was young then. And when I walked into a geospatial event, not everything was online 15 years ago. I was the only one that looked like me, and it was quite daunting. Throughout my career in geospatial, for being a woman, I faced many painful challenges. So I have joined the Women Geospatial board to try to change that and to remove those systemic and social barriers so that other women don't have to go through those challenges that I've faced, because even at the top, the glass ceiling still does exist. I'm very passionate about gender justice, and I'm incredibly passionate about diversity in leadership. I believe a lot of the world's problems would be solved if we had diversity in leadership from community level, organisational, business level, and governments. I'm now going to share a few slides about the women in geospatial. Right, I hope you can all see them. So the Women in Geospatial, we are a global community of uniting, empowering women to become strong leaders and change makers. We're forging a geospatial community where all genders can thrive. Next slide, please.
That should be forwarded on.
Great. So these are amazing statistics at the moment. You know, the hardest work, I've come, and all the hard work's really been done with building our community. At the moment, our members are 4,800 women in 96 countries around the world, with around 30,000 followers in social media. We're about to cross our 10,000 mark on Twitter any day now. This is absolutely amazing. And my role, you know, joining the board behind the scenes, I won't be so visible, is to help grow all our digital social media events we do and help us scale to the next level so that we can be more powerful and influential to help gender justice in women in geospatial. Next slide, please. Our vision is to inspire you, to unite us as a community, and to empower you. Next slide, please. Right, so this slide is, it's International Women's Day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can embrace equity. This lady, she's English, Jane Goodall. She said, it actually doesn't take too much to be considered a difficult woman. That's why there are so many of us. And what she meant is, all you have to do is laugh a little louder than anyone else to be considered difficult. All you have to do is sometimes just wear flat shoes instead of heels and you start getting comments. That's happened to me many times in geospatial. You'd be surprised at the comments on my shoes. So, you know, don't always take things personally, because you just will be considered difficult at times. What she means is that we are judged and scrutinized to another level. So the first thing to talk about is awareness of consciousness and unconscious biases, which we all have. Not just gender, but also in geospatial, ethnicity and sexuality, among other characteristics. Actively choosing to challenge the status quo is something you can do. And to embrace change and equity one of the things you can do is speak up for others and yourself. And sometimes when you are in the minority, it can be difficult to speak up for yourself. So it is helpful when in the moment someone does support you. For example, if we were in a meeting or a situation where someone perhaps said something that I found offensive towards my race, I might freeze in that moment and not be able to speak because I'm feeling offended. Therefore, it's been amazing when someone has supported me in that moment. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. When you are in the minority, you're going to feel uncomfortable. You might feel like you don't belong, but you do belong. So it's a case of how do you navigate the power structure and the situation that you're in, and be comfortable with the fact that you're going to be uncomfortable. Well, I did put the slide together, and it actually says dare to disagree and be difficult. But what we're trying to say here is don't people please. Try to be your authentic self. Feel brave. It's a journey, there's many layers to it. But what we're asking to do is feel brave to say what you really think and what you really feel in a situation. Don't feel that you always have to please everyone around you, because actually your opinions, your technical opinions, may really be valid and be game changing. But if you don't have you're not brave enough, or you don't have the courage to say what you really think, things could go wrong. The key is to learn how to effectively communicate. Next slide, please.
Okay, I think that was the last slide, actually, Mariam.
Okay, thank you.
Not a worry. Mariam, thank you so much for those words. And I think thank you and welcome to our Women in Geospatial Women in Geospatial leadership group now. So I know that we're all extremely excited that you've joined the board and are working now with Julia and everybody else on the team at Women in Geospatial Network. So one of the things that I would say too is Women in Geospatial Network's a volunteer network, everyone. It's an amazing amount of work that goes in from the leadership team to make this a successful thing. So people like Mariam, people like Julia, people like Olive that have really been supporting this and trying to bring these issues to the fore, put in a huge amount of time to make this successful. And I guess what I would say to all of you is hopefully you see people like Mariam as a really amazing role model. I know I do, and I really value what she brings to our network. But hopefully you can also see yourself at some point stepping into roles like the one that Mariam's taking on with the organization. And hopefully that inspires you to want to participate and contribute to the network as well, because the more people that participate and take on roles in what we're doing, the greater and richer the network becomes, and the greater the voice that we have as a collective to sort of really push forward that gender equality and equity piece that we're trying to all work on. So Mariam, thank you so much for those words. I'd love now to introduce Rebecca Firth, who is the Interim Executive Director for the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, and definitely one of my, I guess for many years now, allies along the diversity, equity and inclusion topic. I know we interestingly both got asked at one stage to run a session down in Tanzania quite a few years ago that was it probably a bit last minute, I would say, Rebecca, if I think back on what we actually did. And I think we put together a session. It was sort of 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, I think, of the conference. And I think both of us were really unsure what we were going to get out of that session and who was going to turn up. And to our absolute surprise, we had about 50 people that turned up, coming along to have what was an absolutely amazing hour and I think it was at least an hour, but I know everyone wanted to sort of stay and keep talking. What I remember though out of that space is that we had a room that was not just women. It was a room that had both genders. It had people from all walks of their careers in geospatial at that conference. And I remember the positive energy that came out of it. But the bit that I really remember out of that session was someone turning around to me and going, Yeah, but it's so important that people like you, Denise, that are really visible and sit in these leadership roles, take responsibility for helping push the status quo forwards, and help be those sorts of key role models in the space to really raise the issues when I get the opportunity. And I think until that point, I'd never seen the role and I guess the power and influence that I had out of the place that I was working from, and why it was so important that I use those opportunities when they appear. So it was a really quite incredible session. But with that, I will let Rebecca tell you a bit more about herself and her career, because I know that it's been a fascinating one along the pathway, and I'm sure she's going to share some wonderful thoughts of wisdom along this. So with that, Rebecca, I will get you to unmute and you can take the stage.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Denise. Yeah, you're reminding me about that session in Tanzania. I knew it was a success when people were like sitting on the floor in order to participate in the session, which was probably the first time that's happened for me at a conference, but hopefully not the only time. And thanks also, Mariam, for your introduction. I really liked how I think you sort of touched into some vulnerable moments there about sort of times that you had struggled in your career, and I'm hoping to take this in that direction too and talk about some sort of present challenges that I'm experiencing that I don't know the answer to and I'm looking for advice on. So just before I start, also amazing to see in the chat so many countries joining us today. I'm glad we could make this a virtual event and make it a really global event. So really looking forward to hearing more about this topic of equity and how that is being sort of experienced in all the different countries that we have people joining from. But yeah, as Denise said, I'm Rebecca. I'm the interim exec director at Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. My permanent role is the deputy exec director, but I'm acting as interim for around 6 months at the moment. Those 6 months also coincide with coming back from 6 months of maternity leave. So quite like an interesting time to be a woman, I think, coming back into the work after having a baby and also taking on a new role at the same time. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, also known as HOT, is an international NGO and a community working to map unmapped places in the world. So if anyone who's not heard of it, I'm actually not planning to talk too much about it, but I'm very happy to answer questions or share any information separately. So yeah, I've worked in digital and innovation for about 11 years and been involved in geospatial and particularly OpenStreetMap since 2014. And I'm a geographer by background, so this was obviously kind of a natural home for me. I've been to quite a few International Women's Days and had some fairly varying experiences, from being inspired to being caught quite off guard. I remember one time when a panelist at Accenture started talking at length about sex positions at about 9 a.m. So I'm going to promise not to do that and hope that no other panelists go in that direction either. Yeah, this is my first keynote at an International Women's Day. It's my first talk as an interim exec director. It's my first talk as a mother, actually. I had a baby 8 months ago, as I mentioned. So yeah, pleased to be speaking in this space, which is obviously clearly intended to be a really comfortable space for this type of discussion. So today's theme for International Women's Day is about transitioning from equality to equity. So there's a different theme every year as part of the International Women's Day events. And I think this is a really interesting one because these are two words that are often used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. So I really quickly wanted to just share one slide with a really nice visual on what this is. Oh no, it's asking Zoom. I've got a new laptop, so it's about my preferences. I am just wondering if I can just make it open. I'm just going to make it open access as a Google slide, and then I'm going to drop it in the chat. Anyone with the link can take a look at this. Okay. So no screen sharing, but if I just drop in the chat here a link, you can open that up, but I'll talk through it for anyone that can't.
Nice. Rebecca, just to let everybody know, I'm going to drop that into the Q&A section so they can find it there.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, there's going to be a link to a Google slide in the Q&A, but what it shows is this really nice visual that they created for International Women's Day that shows the difference between equality and equity. So you basically have three people of different heights standing behind a fence, trying to watch a baseball game. And under equality, each individual or group of person is given the same resources or opportunities. So it sort of shows there's three people of different heights standing by a fence. Not all of them can see over the fence, but they all get given the same size box to stand on, which means that the tallest person who could see over the fence anyway can now see even higher. The medium-sized person who couldn't see over the fence is now benefiting from that box and can see over the fence. But the smallest person who couldn't see over the fence originally is only given one box, so they still can't see over the fence. So that's equality. So each individual or group of people is given the same resource to see over that fence. They're all given one box. And it means two of the three people can see. Under equity, you recognize that each person has different circumstances and allocate the resources to those people accordingly. So what you're trying to do is, rather than put equity in the resources you provide people, you're trying to see equity in the outcome of your actions. So trying to result in an equal action. So under the equity scenario, you have three people of different heights. The tall person who could see over the fence anyway is given nothing. The medium-sized person who was benefiting from that one box still has their one box and they can still see. And the shortest person who couldn't see over the fence just with their one box is given two boxes. And now all three people can see over the fence. So International Women's Day theme this year is about moving from equality, which is like fairly crude, one-size-fits-all policies, which are trying to just improve the system in general, but they do help some people. They do help that middle person to be able to see over the fence when they couldn't before, but they don't acknowledge the variety in the human experience, and they don't intentionally seek to address that. And that's what the equity approach does do. It intentionally prioritizes some people over others. So what I wanted to sort of talk about today is, the theme is kind of, the theme of Embrace Equity is like getting the world to talk about why equal opportunities are no longer enough, because they can be exclusionary of some people and not inclusive, which is the intention of them. And embracing equity in work is something that I'm trying to do incredibly in quite a really complicated situation. So my organization has grown tremendously over the last couple of years. We've hired 90 people. We have now got 100 staff in 37 countries. So it's an incredibly diverse mix of people who work in the organization. And so not just the 37 countries, but also that people come from totally different professional backgrounds. They might have worked previously in a tech startup, or they could have worked with government, or they could have worked with, a traditional NGO, which means there's very little kind of cultural code that those people share around the workplace. And it's a remote working environment. It's a very agile working environment, which can be really difficult. And so it's really important to be really intentional about equity in this scenario, because if you don't do that, then the way of working, like the remote distributed working, which happens in English, kind of can serve to amplify the challenges that are inequitable, because it's an environment which naturally helps some people over others. It prioritizes people who have a fast internet connection. It prioritizes people whose first language is English. It prioritizes people who've spent loads of their life in slides and Excels, right? Because you're talking about doing a lot of asynchronous work. And that's something that people get good at by repetition, but it's by no means the full experience that you require of a vibrant team. So what I wanted to do today is just talk about some of the reality of the challenges of this Embrace Equity approach, and to kind of share in the strength of the network, I guess. I want to talk about some of the things that I'm struggling with as I try to lead in doing this, and kind of also touch on some personal sides as well to sort of start some conversations among us that can go beyond today, and hopefully get some advice as well. And so I think what I'm about to talk about is a little bit atypical, but the challenge is, like, we're all here in support of International Women's Day. All of us are doing work towards building equity in some way, but it's really, really hard. Like, it's really easy to say that you're going to empower people, or you're going to have an equitable approach, or you're going to, you know, do whatever. But the thick, messy reality of the world is that there's a lot of gritty stuff in that, and it's really hard to actually make some of the nuanced decisions around that. It's very easy at a top level, but it's very, very difficult when you get to the personal. So yeah, I'm going to share some open questions in the interest of like open thinking on these challenges, and interested to talk through them, see if any of them resonate with your experience, or even more fun, hear about what your versions of those questions are. And I sort of see these a bit of like, they're kind of like gremlins. They're like the ugly side almost of like what you're trying to achieve. So the first one I'm going to talk about is hiring, which has been really difficult. So as I said, I've hired nearly 90 people over the last couple of years, and trying to build gender balance in teams, and particularly in leadership, in a field which is open source technology, geospatial, right? So none of those things are, you know, like the gender balance of those spaces is terrible as it is independently, let alone when you put all three of them together. And you can do things, right, like apply quotas to your candidate pool to make sure that your candidates are, you have a balanced pool that you're assessing. But it sort of, you know, it feels like tokenism to apply quotas to the final interview stage. That feels like, you know, a space where I don't know if I would be comfortable interviewing for a job if I knew that the only reason I was interviewing for it was because I was female. And, you know, what do you do when you're trying to add gender balance to a team, but the highest qualified candidate doesn't do that? And there's been so many times that we face this question in the past few months. It's by no means every time. There are some absolutely incredible female candidates that we are so lucky to be working with. But there's also times where you have like a complete unicorn role, and it's an incredibly niche set of skills that you require, and it's really, really, really difficult to do that. And yeah, it's something that I've experienced multiple times, and I find it a bit of a gremlin. It's like, it's really hard to know what decision to make there. The second one is around promotions and career trajectories. So I'm a big believer, and I think this is maybe also from my personal experience, that some people need to be given power in order to use it, and other people will take that power even if not given it. And one thing that's really important, I think, is to identify who in your team is someone that needs to be given space. Who do you need to actively give space to and support into that power, because they're not going to grab it unless you tell them that they deserve it. And I think that's really difficult, because the reality is, as managers and as leaders of teams, we become responsible for actively seeking the people in our team that require that push. A lot of them are women. And sometimes I think you have to place people in higher positions than their experience might dictate, because you need to sort of take that leap of faith to give them the pressure to develop. And I include myself in that. I think I have been given 3 jobs in my life, which I was, like, on paper not ready for. Like, I did not have the experience, and like someone else had to take that leap of faith on me, but I also had to deal with the pressure of what that meant. Like, I had huge imposter syndrome, but maybe it wasn't even imposter syndrome. I always ask myself the question, like, am I an imposter if I actually don't have the experience for this? It's like, it's another gremlin, right? It's the kind of thing that like sits in the back of your mind at 2 a.m. when, you know, everything about International Women's Day and like female empowerment will make you feel like that's a good step, but sometimes you sit there thinking, do I actually deserve this position? Like, potentially, like, really no, right? And I really need to lean into and step into building comfort with that. Something Mariam actually mentioned in her talk about age, like, I often feel that in the reverse. Like I often try to hide my age quite a lot because I feel that other people will disrespect me for that, and that I'll be viewed as someone who doesn't have legitimate experience. I'm 32, by the way. But the and that's really difficult, right? Because it's like I feel like I'm sort of presenting into a section sometimes, almost maybe trying to act that I'm older than I am, so that people will respect me more. Because when you're in a field where you're on a panel and everyone else is like a man over 50 and you're 26, like that's quite tough, and it results in you sort of feeling really nervous about not just being a woman but being a young woman. And there's been multiple times that like people have actually, it's not just that they're like disrespecting your idea, they'll almost tell you that they're doing that while they're talking to you, which have happened to me, I think, in the geospatial world more than anywhere else. The next topic, which I think is like a really interesting decision like gremlin on this, is around decision making. So I saw this amazing quote last week from the singer Pink, and I think she absolutely nailed it. She said, "The problem with the world is that every group feels attacked." And I thought that was really interesting, because she sort of talked about like going further than that, that like on the quest for equity, the problem is in many cases the goodies are eating the goodies, and we're actually dismissing the baddies, like the baddies, as in even labeling them as baddies, right, is part of me doing that. That's a really dismissing term, but we paint them as stupid, right? Like, and I'm talking about like Donald Trump, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate. But like in doing that, like we're totally missing the point, right? We're living a life based on outrage and standing up for our cause, like, in a really aggressive way, but that can be really alienating. And we're kind of missing the point that like huge numbers of people are moved by the arguments of those people, and we need to interrogate why and address why, rather than, what you often end up with, which is like the good fighting the good to sort of prove who's the best. And it doesn't sound like it applies to work at the high level, but I really think it does. I've seen so many examples where I feel like fear of cancel culture is causing decision paralysis at top levels, and people are over reliant on consensus. And actually, to be an effective leader these days, you need to know that you need to be able to apply the judgment call of when to lean on consensus and when to take a decision, because that decision actually shouldn't be a consensus decision. And I think this topic is bleeding into a huge amount of discomfort and slowing down decision making that it shouldn't. And that's like a crying shame. That's something that we actually can do better at if we can support each other to have these discussions in a better way, rather than that quote from Pink, like the problem is that everybody feels attacked. And that's a really unpleasant and uncomfortable way for the world to work. I also think things like Twitter are probably responsible for like half of that. The other thing that I think is really interesting about like the equality to equity thing, which both Denise and Mariam actually also touched on without as well, was sometimes I feel kind of nervous, like, am I benefiting from my gender in an inappropriate way? If you're working in a space where there are very few women, you're perhaps given a leg up that you wouldn't have been given otherwise. And I think I often feel like caught off guard by the intersectionality and the messiness of reality in that. And like, I have been in situations where I've been prioritized over a man that I actually know I have more privilege than. And so sometimes I sort of feel really, the gremlin is thinking, am I actually taller than I should be on those boxes because I'm benefiting from this? And I think that comment Denise made about like, no, you in a position of power need to use that position. It took me until like 2 weeks ago to realize like, it's not about me. It's not about me being given a leg up. It's about other women seeing that. It's about other women who don't have that privilege, seeing that you're in that position and feeling that they themselves could be in this position. But in order to do that, like, you yourself might be given a leg up that you don't feel you deserve. And I think that's really hard. It's a really, really awkward line. And it's something that sits in the back of your mind and bothers you, right? If you feel that you don't necessarily deserve the opportunities you've been given. But then my personal take on this has also changed a lot in the last year as a new mother. like experiencing gender and my gender again, I think, with new eyes. My career was massively impacted by pregnancy, and gender has massively impacted my career in the last 18 months, right? Like I was a deputy exec director with an exec director leaving whilst I had 2 weeks postpartum. And that is not an easy position to be in, and figuring out what to do and what you're willing to take on and whether you actually can take it on, like that's really, really hard. And it's kind of it's the first time I feel like gender has really explicitly affected my career rather than the like implicit challenges. But then kind of on that front, interestingly, like I don't get paid maternity leave, which is part of the reason that I'm back at work. And my husband does get paid leave, but now he's being discriminated against on shared parental leave to the point, I think, that there's like a legal case in it, which is this bizarre feeling for me, because firstly, I was outraged, and I feel I'm outraged partly because it was so shocking to me because he's a man. I know so many women that has happened to, and it doesn't feel that surprising, right? So there's part of my own bias and expectations happening there. But then the other one is, you know, I personally also, I now feel really guilty, right? His career has been negatively impacted because he was trying to support my career, which is a really strange experience that I never expected to end up in as a woman. I always thought it will be my career that is the one that's impacted by pregnancy and maternity leave. And actually now I'm now responsible for your career through taking the choice that we would share paid like time off for our baby. And then I've got one more example on a personal level, and then I'm going to wrap this up. But this is quite a deep one. I feel like maybe, I don't know, clearly when I was writing this last night, my juices were flowing a bit. But I want to mention it because I think it's really important. Like, I'm the mother of an 8-month-old baby boy. And for true equity, some people are going to have to lose, right? Men are going to need to find it harder than they used to. So that's not harder than they should, harder than they used to. But like what that means for me is my son will find it harder to get into university than my dad did. And that is absolutely the right thing. That is absolutely right that should be the case. But my challenge is like, how do I explain that to him in a way that he's going to support and he's going to be in on? And how do I do that without shaming him? And how do I make sure that he'll feel respectful of that topic and not alienate it? Because I think that's where you end up with like the Jordan Petersons and the Andrew Tates being so successful, is because people feel alienated. And it's my responsibility as his mother to explain that. And like, I think in part of the kind of waves of improving equity in the world, like we are going to have to take that on as part of this challenge. And it's really, really difficult. So yeah, these are some of the questions that I'm facing as I kind of journey through my mind about what it really means to consider equity in work. And I don't have the answers to any of these, but I suspect a lot of people are struggling with this kind of thing. It's not the high level, it's the gritty reality of the nuance and the human kind of condition of what you're trying to do. So yeah, I'd love to hear other people's, experiences from the grindstone, like not just on International Women's Day when everything is really feels great and really positive and we have nice events like this, but your sort of, wintry Monday morning grey feelings when it's really difficult, or like the things that catch you at 2 a.m. of, am I really contributing to this agenda or not? And yeah, I just really hope that we can all move forward on this topic of equity with kindness and empathy and being allies to each other as we do it. And yeah, in many ways, I really hope that, International Women's Day will become one of those things that 100 years from now is no longer needed, but all of us are going to have to embrace a lot of our internal struggles with embracing equity on our quest for that. So thanks very much. And yeah, really looking forward to some discussion and hearing other people's reflections on this kind of a topic. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Rebecca. As always, I could sit listening to that presentation for quite a bit longer, but I'm conscious of time, so we'll jump quickly to the next. Just before I bring our next speaker on as well, hopefully we fixed the Q&A, so everybody should be able to see the question and answer section now and anything that comes in on that. So do keep adding your thoughts and queries out and questions you'd like for the panel to get to at that stage as well. So hopefully that's all working. If not, keep adding questions and comments to us in there and Esther and I will keep working in the background to make sure that that gets up and working. So with that, I'd love for Vanessa Lawrence to turn her speaker and her camera on. So Dr. Vanessa Lawrence, I mean, I could probably give you a half an hour speech on Vanessa's career and the various roles that she's had. I know that she's shaking her head at me. But I think for me, Vanessa was one of those role models when I first got into the geospatial community. I think from Australia, watching someone that was the head of the Ordnance Survey and she was female was such an incredible thing at the time that I joined sort of 20 years ago. And sort of looking at that, the influence that she had on that organization. So for me, and I think at that stage as well, and across that early part of my career, there were very, very few women that you could look to in senior leadership roles. So Vanessa, I see you as an absolute trailblazer for our community in that sort of role model and senior leadership space. With that, I won't give much further introduction. Currently, Vanessa is an international advisor and holds a huge number of different roles in our community and also representing our geospatial community internationally. But I'll let her tell you a bit more about her career and some of the things that she's learned along the way as well. So Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Denise, and welcome to everyone all around the world. And I really appreciate the tremendous honour, I say honour, to present to you today. I was asked to chat through my career, and I really want to thank everybody who's put today together. As Denise, you so clearly articulated, these things just don't happen. They take a lot of work. So to thank you and the AGI and Women in Geospatial and other areas for putting it together. I'd also like to say, Rachel, what a brilliant, kind of talk you've given. And, from my point of view, it was the way you talked about the gritty reality is so true. And also your equity slide made me smile, because last week I attended a fantastic talk by Dr. Shakir Mohammed, who's a senior staff scientist at DeepMind, an honorary professor at UCL. And he absolutely effectively talked in using many other examples about the boxes and how we as people who perhaps do recruitment and other things need to think very carefully about how we give opportunity to everyone so that they can look at the same level. So I really appreciated all of the analogies you gave, Rebecca. So let me introduce myself, because otherwise it's a bit hard to think, who is this person who's turned up on my screen this morning while I'm having my coffee, or maybe having your dinner, depending where you are in the world. So today I work internationally as a senior advisor to governments, intergovernmental organizations, and large private organizations. Often I'm the person who might brief the board, might brief the cabinet of countries in order to get geospatial going. And then I'm lucky enough to work with about 80 associates who are based all around the world. And we can then help people understand exactly what they need to think about and do in order to get that geospatial infrastructure underpinning not just an organization, but their whole country. That's what I do internationally, and I do fly all over the world, but I also have a portfolio of appointments as well. That's what I do in the UK, really. In the UK, I do advise if people ask, but mainly there are so many good advisors who are connected with our National Mapping Agency. I tend to work internationally. So my other portfolio includes things like being a non-executive director and a trustee of the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Centre for Data Science and AI. And I'm also a non-executive director for the Satellite Applications Catapult, which is our sort of space innovation centre for satellite use in the UK. And then I'm proud to also be a board member of something called the Walker Institute, which is all about climate science and climate adaptation around the world. We also, I greatly believe in how we can do education and training. And I'm the co-chair of the UK Government Centre for Doctoral Training in Geospatial Systems. And also I happen to be a professor at the University of Southampton. And then rather unusually, and this really shocked me too, in 2007, I was asked by, effectively, the appointments made through our royal household, but to be the honorary colonel of 135 Geographic Squadron Royal Engineers. That's the reserve part, i.e. they're part-time, of the British Army that does geospatial information. But it happens that because of various mergers, I actually now take that role across the whole of anybody doing geospatial in the British, within the Royal Engineers, within the British Army. And then in the pandemic, very much surprised, I was given a second one, and I now serve in the Royal Air Force as well. To basically, I'm an honorary group captain in 601 Squadron, and I am there to assist the governance and assist in a technical sense, combining Space Command, which is a part of the UK government, with our geospatial world. And so that's been fascinating. Those are all, kind of slightly challenging appointments, and maybe we'll come on to talk about that. But I'm also a long-standing trustee of the Royal Geographical Society and a patron of two charities that I feel passionate about, the Cure Parkinson's Trust, or now called Cure Parkinson's, and also Map Action, which many of you will know, and I have been the patron since the very beginning of it, and I'm very proud to be part of it. So basically, that's what I do today. Some of you may know me through past positions I've held, like being the Director General and Chief Executive of the Ordnance Survey for 14 years, and the first female chair of the AGI, and a founding co-chair of something called UNGGIM, the United Nations Global Geospatial Information Management, and that's something we'll touch on going forward. So how did all this happen? Well, let's first of all talk about imposter syndrome. I absolutely, so many times in my life, have thought, why am I here? How did this happen? And sometimes along the way, just like, some of Rebecca's stories horrify me on things like your maternity leave, I've had real blockers. But I'm a great believer in, basically stand up, dust yourself off, and think constructively about how you can move forward. So I come from a very sort of ordinary family. Very sadly, my father died when I was very small. And so unusually for my era, I was brought up in by my mother in a one-parent family. And my school had good influences and bad. I loved geography. I loved everything about the geography kind of arena. And the geography teacher was the only one who took any notice of me. Most of the others, they didn't take any, they really didn't encourage me. And that was great. But when I got to choosing our, we call them in this country, A-levels, the careers teacher said, when I said, I want to be a geographer, she literally looked me straight in the face and said, you don't come from the kind of family that can muck about. Get that idea out of your head. And I said, but that's what I want to do. She said, right. And she literally said, as from tomorrow morning, you'll be doing physics, biology, chemistry, and maths. And I said, no, I want to do geography. And she said, you won't be doing it. So I lived with that. And it took me a number of nuances and a number of times. And school, when I was growing up, you didn't tend to question quite as much as you might today. And Anyway, 5 weeks into going to do a university course on psychology, which I had no intention of really doing, I managed to walk into the geography department and told them I'd be a geographer, told them I wanted to do it. And a very young geography lecturer actually asked this gentleman who I was speaking to, he said, just listen to her. I think this is a good idea. So anyway, I managed to change to geography with no kind of senior school background. And everything I've done ever since has been to do with geography. So having finished my undergraduate education, I had no money. And in those days, you had to always pay to go on and do your master's or anything. And I didn't have the right, because I didn't possibly have the right background. I hadn't got a first or anything, but somehow I managed to get onto a course, really just from an interview and how passionate I was, to look at satellite Earth observation and its applications. And this was at a time when there were no jobs in our country to do that. And that was the crashing reality when I graduated a year later. So I was given an opportunity for which I forever will be grateful. It was a complete right turn to what I really wanted to do, because I wanted to be a geographer. And somebody heard me give a talk at a conference, and they basically offered me a job. And my first reaction was, absolutely no, I'm sorry, I'm not at all interested in going into the publishing industry, even though you say it's to be the head of geography for you. And then I have to say I was very incentivized when he said, look, do you have an overdraft? And I said, yes, of course. In fact, I'm terribly in debt. Terribly in debt in those days was £1,956 after nearly 5 years at university. But he said, right, I'll pay it off if you come for 10 days. And after 10 days, you can leave. Anyway, I have to say, I stayed 14 years. This was a company called Pearson, who owned Longman and many other brands like Penguin. And I ended up being the sort of head of geography. But it wasn't easy. On my first day, I went to see my boss. And he said, I've no intention of you staying. I've no idea why you've been employed. And, well, it's the 4th of September. The good thing is you'll be gone from here by December. And so what do? You're in your 20s and you have that kind of thing. And also there was nobody to appeal to. Anyway, the good thing was that I looked around and there were some people who genuinely wanted me to be successful. 2 men, both called Colin, said, oh, just ignore him. He's your boss. We'll teach you your job. And thankfully they did. And what Longman and Pearson gave me was an outstanding business training. Not quite in the area I wanted to be in. Okay, I was head of geography and geology, and my job was to think up new ideas for books. And right from the get-go, I had 35 staff to manage. I had no idea how to manage staff. But I looked around and took the best from everybody, and they taught me. And I'm forever grateful. And I still know those 2 men, Colin, today. I then, like many times, it's about the opportunity. And it goes back to those boxes, isn't it, really? The opportunity for me came about in a rather strange way. A person came into my office and said, I'm looking for Mark. And I said, oh, I'm very sorry, he's out. He said, oh, dear. Oh, that's terrible. And I said, well, how can I help you? I don't think you can. You didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, did you? I said, no. He said, well, then you won't be able to help me. And I said, forgive me, I went to university. He said, oh, can you write? I said, yes, of course I can write. He said, oh, can you write 10,000 words by tomorrow morning? It doesn't really matter on what. And I said, yes. And I said, but may I ask why? He said, oh, we have a scholarship. We have to go in for it. And if you do it, then we'll have ticked the box. And I said, how do I win the scholarship? He said, we've never won it. It's been going for about 50 years. I said, why don't we ever win it? He said, well, it gives you a year off of your salary. And well, we just don't. We let others win it. So you can imagine what I did. I decided that I was going to win it. And by the morning, I had written 10,000 words on how geospatial information would transform everyone's lives. I called it how GIS would transform people's lives. And this shows how old I am. I wrote that in the 1980s. Anyway, cut a long story short, I won the scholarship, and I did eventually take the scholarship, and I went around the world and started to look at early GIS, and I wrote it up properly. Meanwhile, I had my own trauma. I had the most terrible accident not just before I left. I had a terrible accident and was off work for 18 months. An out-of-control skier, unfortunately, hit me and jumped from over 100 feet onto my back and then catapulted me over an edge. So things are never easy, but I left on that scholarship as a disabled person on crutches by then, and I still went ahead with it. Anyway, what did that result in? Setting up a brand new part of Pearson called Longman Geoinformation. It started with 3 of us, and we grew it to over 300 people. I didn't own any part of it, but it gave me my first sort of true understanding of how complicated it is to be a leader. And what did it do? It basically not only published books, but it published first digital assets, combined data sets from the European Commission and things like that. It also published magazines, and it took over, and it also started magazines in everything from Asia Pacific through to America. And what I learned was, if you could set yourself a vision and try and make it as simple as possible, you could try and achieve, because ambiguity surrounded everything. Nobody really understood whether this was needed by the market, but you just had to do it. Anyway, from there, I was approached to go to a company called Autodesk, and Autodesk was a very different environment. It was a very large multinational, international company based in the West Coast of America, with a very different view on everything and a very thrusting view. But I had the opportunity to lead 2 very important projects. One was the first ever creation of the election ward boundaries in South Africa, working to the Independent Electoral Committee and working to Thabo Mbeki and ultimately to Nelson Mandela. And then also the working with the both in coordinated way, both people from the Palestinian Liberation Army and also from the Israeli government, to provide the watershed maps of the Golan Heights to go to the peace process mapping discussions regarding the peace talks led by Bill Clinton. And that taught me a great deal about leadership, ambiguity, and how to manage. Anyway, here I was, a young person, not quite sure where I was going next, and I was taken out for dinner in London by a person who literally said over the dessert, who's a very important person, I couldn't understand why he'd invited me out to dinner. And he said the immortal words to me, Vanessa, I thought I would have dinner with you just to check you wouldn't be stupid enough to apply to be the Director General and Chief Executive of the Ordnance Survey. I'd never even thought about it. I knew it was up for application, but, me? No way. Anyway, as I walked away from dinner, I thought, he genuinely must think that I possibly could get it. So anyway, I'm forever grateful to a man in the Cayman Islands, believe it or not, who told me that if I didn't apply for the job, I would never be actually taken out for dinner again by him. He said, you're just the person they need. So I did apply, and I'm very proud that I got the job. And I was 36 when I got the job, and I took over the job when I was 37. But there were real problems. First of all, the national newspapers went bananas. There was a full-page spread in the Financial Times, which is a big newspaper here in the UK, a double-page spread with a picture that was half the size of a mainstream newspaper in the Daily Saturday Telegraph. Why? Because it was so unusual to have a woman, first woman and all of these things. And I was just lucky that basically when I started, I had some outstanding advice from people, and I stuck to that advice, and I basically took it steadily. And as Rebecca so wisely said, always communicate all the way through. And I had to lead on the changing customer needs for Ordnance Survey. I had to balance working with 19 ministers in 14 years. I had to take us through many twists and turns, some of which you all know, creating a business model where there were 500 business partners recruited to work with the data. And also, I'm very proud that as soon as we won the London Olympics, within a few days, I was appointed as the geospatial lead for the London Olympics. And that was unusual because normally the International Olympic Committee tends to want the American government to do this. Anyway, along the way, what I learned was very clearly that you had to coordinate and work together. As time went on, I had the honor of being approached by the UN to start something completely new. And it was to be an official part of the UN. It soon got its name of UNGGIM. But there I definitely had imposter syndrome, because I could not imagine myself ever leading in this, nor chairing some very unusual people. Some people from all over the world that I could never have thought I would end up chairing. Anyway, as time went on, after 14 years, I decided it was a good idea to move. And as my time at the UN, I decided to do effectively nearly a year there full time. And then I went to the World Bank, and there I found myself again in a different culture, a different way of working, and I was so delighted to see so many women as leaders in the World Bank and the UN structures. And equally, I also have been delighted to see so many women coming through those things. So just to sort of finish, did I think I could be a leader, and even more a female leader? Not at all in my mind. Absolutely not. It took others to show me that I could be a leader. And it was about really listening to them and then thinking, how can I really try to meet what they would like me to do? I watch other leaders very carefully. I always try to make complex things as simple as possible. And the one thing I really think is important is try to know your own weaknesses. I often start meetings when I'm starting something new by saying, look, can I just tell you, I'm not very good at this, but this is my strength. And people are really surprised, that you're admitting that. But that's the case. Rebecca talked about, in summary, her being very resilient, and you do have to be resilient. But you also have to show people confidence, even when sometimes you don't know what to do. And my biggest one of that was on the 9/11 crisis with the Twin Towers, where about 400 people just looked at me and said, what do we do? And you still have to show people confidence, because everybody was very worried. I think you also need to try and be humble and not be a tall poppy along the way, and never judge situations too early. And then you also need to, I work my life on a pie where you have to absolutely be clear, you're giving time to family, friends. I've been a carer for over about 14 years, and all those people you love, as well as doing all your jobs. And so one thing that I was taught when I was doing that work in South Africa, the head of the Independent Electoral Committee, rather, was a slightly unusual man. And he said to me, if you can dream it, you can do it. And I thought those were his words, but they turned out not to be. They turned out to be from Walt Disney. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you this morning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Vanessa. As always, your career rather astounds me when I hear you talk about it in that. And I know that we probably could have got an awful lot more detail from you over the course of that. But I'm conscious that we've only got about 15 minutes, and I want to throw to Mariam now so that we can have a little bit of a round off of the day in some discussion. And I know she's got some great questions for all of us. I'll stay on screen as well.
Hello, hi.
Hi, Mariam.
So today we have global icons on our panel: Denise, Dr. Vanessa, and Rebecca. I'm incredibly inspired by what Rebecca and Vanessa have had to say, and the similarities in how they feel in their journeys and the shared experiences I have. So the panel, before I had my Netflix fix last night, I had a moment of awe. I get to ask these women what I am most curious about. What a privilege. The specialness of being part of the Women in Geospatial community is that we get access to these international leaders when we ordinarily would not. But also we get to be in an intimate setting and learn about them intimately. So today's panel is my favourite topic around leadership. It's about entering leadership. So I've got 3 questions, and I'm going to go around the panel and ask a question to each one. So I don't know if there's an order you'd like me to go in, Denise. So I could start off with Denise, Rebecca, then Vanessa. So question 1, of course, what do we all love? It's all about location. Where did you grow up? Where? And before your professional career began, did you use or have any leadership roles of any sort?
Well, so as most people know, it's a funny Australian accent. So I grew up in Melbourne. I guess for a leadership role, actually, I'm going to really say my parents, and interestingly, both my mum and my dad, in the way that I grew up, and as a result, they pushed me into leadership roles myself. So I went to a school that enabled me to have a lot of different options. It was a female school. Interestingly, the tagline for the high school that I went to was creating world-ready women in where I went to Melbourne. So I think for the 1990s, that was a fairly forward-thinking type of space. But I actually, most people would not realize this, but I'm quite naturally an introvert, and I really was when I was a kid. My mum used to have to kind of pull me out from behind her legs in order to be able to go into any social situation. But the leadership role that really probably changed me was that I got pushed into being the head student for my primary school. Now, we're a little primary school in the suburbs of Melbourne, but I got pushed into that role, and I think the day I got it, I just about fainted. I was so freaked out by the idea that I needed to step into something where people were going to look at me. And I would have to stand up in front of the whole school and talk to them. I remember just about vomiting on the first day. I stood up in front of the school of students to talk to everybody. But I think that leadership role that young, and having people kind of around me to coach me and to sort of help me get into that space was probably quite pivotal, ultimately in then putting myself into further leadership roles. But it was a learned art. It was definitely not was not something simple in all of that. So that's probably how my first leadership role was. Definitely, I was about 12 and sort of got put into that space, but it was quite fun.
Thank you. We can go to Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I grew up in Cambridge, UK, so a small town, like an hour or so from London. I have 4 sisters, and I am absolutely not the leader. And so I don't think I had, yeah, I don't think I showed any intention or interest or skill at leadership ever in my youth. I also do feel, though, kind of like Vanessa said, like I'm definitely in a leadership role by accident, not by design. It kind of just evolved naturally. And I do really feel like I'm so passionate about the organization I work for, and I want so desperately for it to achieve what it could and fulfill its potential. And I feel like I want to do whatever role I can do to make that happen. And if that's being in a leadership role or not, I'm totally okay with that. I don't have a kind of ego in the game. I just really want to play the best role I can for it to succeed. And I feel quite strongly that we need space for that to be okay. Like I was so heartened to hear Vanessa saying similar things too. Like, oh, I just didn't really think of myself in that role. And then suddenly someone told me I could be in it. And then actually, hey, it worked out. And I think, yeah, sometimes the most like nuanced and subtle and interesting leaders I've worked for have been people that you wouldn't they wouldn't have self-selected into that group. So yeah, I think I was not a leader by any strength.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go to Rebecca. Go to Dr. Vanessa.
Thank you very much. And very much echoing Rebecca's idea of passion. And I'm absolutely happy, and Denise knows this, that I will do anything. As long as I'm passionate about it, it doesn't have to be the leader role. And there are many times, certainly, but often by choice since 2015, I have been very, very happy to go and do something, kind of that's slightly different, as long as it passionately moves forward what we do. But I was brought up in Amersham and Buckinghamshire in the UK. As I mentioned, things were very difficult because of my father dying so early. He didn't have a pension or any of those things, so things were really difficult. But my mother gave me the opportunity. She said when I was about 12, that I could choose a youth group as long as it was effectively 50% of a pound. So 50p, as we called it in those days, for those that know British currency. And I chose the British Red Cross. And I was very nervous. And I will never forget walking into that hut and thinking, oh, this isn't for me. And luckily, other young people welcomed me in and everything. But then we had this wonderful, I say wonderful now, the time I thought she was horrible, lady called Miss White, who said, you are far too shy. As a result, you're going to lead our speaking competition. I said, I'd hate to do that, Miss White. And she said, really? Well, I've decided you're doing it. And right, get on with it. So I did something about smoking and how you shouldn't smoke. And I decided that in order she'd never ask me again, I needed to win it. And so with 2 friends, we put together this speech and we won it. But as a result, it led to so many things. I suddenly found myself projected into doing something I could never have dreamed of, which was being approached by the local hospital radio to go and be a disc jockey. Well, I thought this was great because it gave me something with the boys' school. Everybody in the boys' school thought it was brilliant that you were on radio. And this led to actually doing a lot more for national broadcasting when I was about 15, 16. So it sort of led to all kind of leadership. The other group I would thank, and I absolutely raise money for them, and I do things all around the world for them, is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. I was given the opportunity to do something called the Duke of Edinburgh Award. If you live internationally, look at the International Duke of Edinburgh Award. Here was I as a slightly unadventurous young woman, and they gave me everything I needed and was equipped. By the time I was 18, I was fully equipped to do that. And the British Red Cross sent me off as an international diplomat very early to do things. And crikey, all to do with those 2 people, Miss White and the Duke of Edinburgh Award.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm really glad you talked about passion there, because actually lately in my mind, I've been worrying about being passionate because one of the most famous global geospatial leaders quite recently told me that I was too passionate and I needed to be less passionate. But after listening to you, I think not. So
I don't agree.
Thank you. Because I was worrying, oh gosh, is that something wrong with me? But no, okay, that's what drives me as well. So question number 2, we'll start with Denise. I think you've all sort of touched on this, but to be clear, was leadership your ambitious pursuit from the get-go, or did you fall into it? And was there a defining moment that led you into your first role?
Right. Well, so I covered the kids role. And that probably lead into that says absolutely not. The idea of me really ever standing up in front of people or being responsible and leading people, I think probably scared the daylights out of me as I was growing up as a kid. So I think definitely not in my original plan. And, you know, really, if you look at what I studied, I did an undergraduate degree in international politics and public policy. So I probably originally saw myself as a background public servant, you know, so that was probably never something I really entered thinking I was going to do something that was in a leadership context. So what changed and how did kind of I end up where I am now was, I think, having passionate people actually around me, that were passionate about geography and passionate about geospatial and passionate about what that was going to change in the world. And what I sort of started to realize in a lot of these amazing leaders, and I know, Vanessa, you know a lot of these people, sort of the Bruce Thompsons of the world and Peter Woodgates of the world and Steve Jacoby's back in Australia, all of them had passion. And they were really keen as well as leaders to bring, I think, interesting, a lot of us younger people along with their passion and encourage us to get into different roles and encouraged us into different projects that we were doing in that sort of space in Australia. So I think leadership happened a little bit by osmosis for me. I'm not sure it's something that I ever pursued. It just kind of became one of those things where what I realized was that in order to actually make the changes in the world that I wanted to make, I actually needed to kind of take on some of those leadership roles, and that they were going to be some of the best ways that I could help and influence what I wanted to be doing in the world. So it was kind of, yeah, definitely not a plan by any stretch of the imagination. And a lot of the skill, I think, in there has been a bit like learning to ride a bike. And the way I would characterize that is that you fall off an awful lot at the beginning and you skin your knees. And you know, end up with scars from doing it. So definitely from getting up in public speaking, I can remember having that, you know, I'm going to vomit, I'm going to faint feeling multiple times. And then also getting off stage and going, oh my God, what the heck did I just say? And realizing that you completely stuffed it up on stage as well. But you carry those scars with you and you learn from them and you get back on the bike and you keep on riding. And I think for me, that's been a bit of leadership too, is recognizing you don't always get it right, but you do the very best you can. I think, Rebecca, to kind of things that you said, and Vanessa, things that you said as well, you do the very best you can with where you're at that moment, trying to be the best leader you can. And I think that's kind of how I ended up there.
Thank you, Denise. I'm pleased to hear that because you always come across as such a strong leader. I would never have imagined that. So I'm glad to hear it. If we can go to Rebecca.
Yeah, so as I said, I don't think I had kind of much ambition in me to be a leader from the get-go, and I don't think I do either still, which is like a really strange thing to say in an executive director position. But like I don't really, when I think about my future career, like leadership isn't a thing that I am angling towards. It's more like passion for what I can do, and if that happens to be a leadership role, then that's like a secondary item. I do feel that I did have a defining moment though that kind of pushed it in that direction, which was when was it, about 4 years ago. I applied for something which is called the Audacious Project, which is a project hosted out of TED, where they kind of set up basically like a venture capital program for NGOs, where they've got loads of interesting philanthropists who want to sort of support interesting ideas, and you kind of go through quite a sort of long and intense application process over about a year to pitch to those donors, and then different donors kind of choose to come in on your idea. But what it does is it gave us like 5 to 6 years of funding for the organization all in one go, which is really, really rare for an NGO. Normally you're going like cap in hand, 50K at a time in donor meetings like every 2 weeks. And this kind of, I guess, was like a really defining moment for me, because I had just thought it was an interesting thing to potentially apply for. So just like chucked in a proposal, just like on the off chance, and then somehow ended up like pitching to loads of billionaires, and having quite an odd experience, I think, of thinking like, well, I'd never spoken to a billionaire before, so I didn't really know like what that meant. And actually, it was really strange, because it's actually all about you, and it's all about your organization, because like they already have all the money, they can buy all the things. What they're looking for now is to buy impact, and that's you. And so it was this really strange experience for me, I think, where I was kind of expecting to be like the smallest person in the room and really nervous and ever so grateful, and how could I possibly thank you so much, you know, very like British in the sort of approach of how to handle that conversation. And actually you sort of end up like in this weirdly center stage position where they're looking to make an investment and they're just interested in you and the work. And it kind of propelled me, I think, into this like leadership space. And there's sort of 3 things that I think since then have come from that for me, because I wasn't expecting to be in a leadership position, like running that kind of a project. So it has made me a big believer in leadership by doing. By that, I mean, like, I think when you don't have the confidence or the experience to tell other people what to do, if they respect your execution and your delivery, it's a lot easier. And so I sort of focused on like, do my work really well, and then I can influence other people because I have credibility. And so that's really hard, right? Like, I wish I could just stand up and give a motivational speech and tell everyone to do stuff, right? But like, I don't feel authentic or that that's possible for me, especially when like at this point, like 7 of the 8 people I manage are more than a decade older than me. And so it was really hard to say something like that. And then the other thing I think is really interesting that's come out in this discussion a lot is everyone's mentioned like key people that incentivize them in their journey. And those people probably don't know that they influenced you that much. And I always think like the optimist flip side of that is like, you know that those people were your leaders, but you don't know who you have done that for. And so I don't know, I feel that like it's like always my sort of like optimistic International Women's Day approach is like, try and think about like, well, if you're acting with good intention and you're doing your best in these scenarios, maybe you actually could say something one time which maybe resonated with somebody, and actually that's like a really positive impact of your ripple. And yeah, there's a lot of I think there's a lot of like clinging to that sometimes that can be helpful.
Thank you. It's really helpful to hear that, because I've echoed a lot of what you've said today in how you feel, Rebecca. So it's amazing I'm not the only one that can be in a leadership position and feel like that. So let's move on to Vanessa, please.
I'll keep it short, but because Rebecca said so many great things here. First of all, I think it's about being passionate about what you're doing rather than just wanting to be a leader. I've been approached many, many times with incredibly high value jobs. I've turned them all down because I'm passionate about what I do. And I've often said to quite important people in my country and other countries, excuse me, I don't actually see the link to what geography for me. And they kind of like rather shocked and say, no, but running my organization, I'll pay you this. And not what my passion is. It's about making a difference in geospatial and in areas of space and AI and things. So one point I would bring up to us all is, if you have the chance to go and thank or contact that person who made it for you, have that opportunity. I heard I'd got the job for being Director General, which I will never forget that night when I heard. And I did something that I'm so glad I did. I sat down and wrote a letter, a handwritten letter, to my geography teacher, Mrs. Dover. And then I spent about 4 weeks trying to find her. And I got it sent to her. And it made a huge difference to her and to her family that I had said thank you. And it made a huge difference to me that I had actually managed to say thank you. And that was great. And she gave me the ultimate responsibility of organising her funeral as my thank you. So that was kind of, it was a bit of a shock. She didn't tell me before she died, but I did it, and did it exactly she wanted. But absolutely, I didn't recognise I wanted to be a leader. I've just been passionate about my subject. And I think I'm not sure, and this is another whole debate, if you set out in the world to be a leader, whether you are the best leader or whether being passionate about something and you're emerging as somebody who people choose to be a leader is a better way. But that's a big debate.
That is.
Thank you.
I think unfortunately we're going to have to bring our conversation to a close because of the time. I know I could kind of keep on having these chats, and I always find that on these days, maybe one day I need to extend this out and make sure it's a bit more time so that we can keep on talking about this as well. But I'm going to pop up just a couple of closing slides. I just want to say thank you, big thank you to Mariam for being our facilitator this afternoon and being flexible on time and things. And you know, Vanessa and Rebecca, you know, for me today, they've just been such fantastic presentations. And I think really a big thank you, not just for the presentation, but for what you've both shared. You know, I think there's a really big challenge in being that vulnerable in a public space like the both of you have been today in what you've shared personally. And I think that's incredibly valuable to a lot of the people listening. I know it's valuable for me. So thank you both for what you've both shared today. Okay, let me put up a couple of slides. I'm going to share screen just to finish this off. The first one I'm going to put here. I can get it to go full screen. Hopefully that works. Excellent. Was just to quickly show people the slide that Rebecca shared, so the Embrace Equity slide. What we'll do with this is add these links into an email after this, and when we've got the video up as well from today that you can share, we'll put that there as well. I also wanted to quickly put this up. One of the things that I love out of International Women's Day is to really encourage people to think about what that one action might be that you want to take from today and share with the rest of the world, or share with just in your organization or with your friends. So one that popped up for me today is something the female lead is doing, and I do encourage you to go and have a look at that. And it's to think about your social media, think about what you portray, think about those things that you say in the world, but also how, interesting from our tech perspective at the moment, how those algorithms that look at everything that people say are impacted by what we put out into our feeds. And so they've got a hashtag disrupt your feed. So I do encourage you to go and have a look at that and see what that means and see what they're encouraging people to do in that space. A shout out as well to Geospatial and their international awards. They wanted me to just point out that the awards are still open for people to apply for. So if you know of an amazing organization that's doing something fantastic in the geospatial realm, please encourage them to apply or put the application in for them. Now, quickly, obviously this event was originally going to be an in-person thing in London, and I know that we had a number of registrants that were disappointed that we didn't do that in person, but I have another event that you could come and do. So if you're keen to do some networking and you're going to be in London, Women in Geospatial have teamed up with the GeoMob group. And we've been putting together and curating an evening where we have got a big focus on the female leaders doing amazing geospatial techie work at the moment. So if you're keen to come along and do a bit of networking, meet some people, see some incredible presentations, do have a look at the GeoMob website and register and come along in April for that. And so with that, I'll bring things to a close. For me today, I've learned a huge amount as always, and come away thankfully incredibly inspired. Despite the fact that we've still got challenges, I know that we've got incredible leaders in working in our field, not just from a technical perspective, but equally from a building our community perspective. And I think that as long as we can keep on being passionate, as I've learned today, be passionate about geography, but I think be passionate about everybody's ability to contribute to our geospatial community as well and bring their different diverse experiences and skill sets to what we can do, I know that our community can have a huge and positive impact across the world in so many different areas, even in our gender space as well. And so with that, I will say thank you again to our presenters, to our sponsors, and to all of you for tuning in today. And I wish you all a very, very happy International Women's Day. Thank you very much, everybody.